What more can be said about our abortion holocaust and our efforts to abort it? You don't want to hear, or need to hear, any more logical arguments against abortion, any more than you need to hear logical arguments against geocentrism or a flat earth or leprechauns. There are dozens of excellent, clear, and persuasive books out there conclusively refuting the pro-choice arguments. I tried to write a couple of them myself. It's embarrassingly easy. It's like shooting ducks in a pail. You also don't want to hear from me about political strategies, important as that subject is, because I am a genuine certified absent-minded philosophy professor, with ADD no less, and philosophers are terrible when it comes to politics. The names of Plato, Hegel, Karl Marx, and Heidegger come to mind, all of whom enthusiastically recommended totalitarian regimes. You also don't want to hear from me about psychological techniques of salesmanship and influencing people, important as that is, because absent-minded professors are rarely good psychologists and effective people persons. They tend to be geeks. Finally, you don't want to hear from me about how to harness the most powerful force in the world, namely the spiritual power of sanctity, how to be the next Mother Teresa. If you really want to know, go to Mother Teresa. Asking me to give you lessons on sainthood is like asking Donald Trump to give you lessons on politeness. So what can I talk about? Perhaps nothing that you don't already know. So it has to be something you do already know. But to avoid repetition and boredom, it has to be a little more serious, a little more in-depth, a little more radical than before. Maybe a little more literal. Maybe one of the things we all believe and all take for granted is in fact more literal than we think. And maybe that will be startling to us. What might that be? Probably something in the Bible. That's certainly the most startling book in the world, the most radically inside-out and upside-downing book ever written. Has anyone ever preached a crazier sermon than Jesus' Sermon on the Mount? Nietzsche called for a re-evaluation of all values, and he thought of himself as a radical, but he was a piker compared to Jesus. Has anyone ever made a wilder claim than he did? The man of sorrows, who popped out of a mother's womb as a little baby and had to learn to speak and who got himself crucified as a common criminal, this man claimed to be God. If you want to be shocked, go to that book. It's not a book, it's a lightning storm. All right, let's pick one passage. It's a passage that goes to the absolute heart of our motivation for being passionate about the pro-life cause. If anybody, our enemies or our friends or even the Pope, wants to know why we are so, quote, obsessed with abortion, unquote, here is our answer. Come look with me at a familiar story, one that changed the world, the story of the conversion of St. Paul, in the 9th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. All I want to do here is to take this story at face value and literally. It's not an allegory or a parable. It's an eyewitness description of what some people actually saw and heard. If it's not that, if it's not a literal truth, then it's a literal lie. In either case, it's literal. Here is Saul of Tarsus, a really nasty guy who gets his jollies out of exterminating rats. The rats are Christians. To him they are vermin. They stink to high heaven. They offend Almighty God. One of the most righteous things one can do, Saul is convinced, if we are on God's side, is to deal mercilessly with this disease, this horrible blasphemy by the followers of a mere man who claimed to be God. You see, Saul may have been a rather nasty kind of person, but he's not stupid. He's an excellent logician. If Jesus is not who these Christians say he is, then he is the greatest blasphemer who ever lived. And Christians who believe in him are continuing that blasphemy, that idolatry, that violation of the very first and greatest of all the commandments, to worship and adore God alone, not any creature, certainly not any mere human being. And then, on the road to Damascus, he is knocked off his high horse, psychologically, if not physically, the text doesn't mention a horse, by a light from heaven. And he hears a voice from heaven, and it says the very last thing he ever expected to hear. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? But you can't persecute God. God is an eternal, transcendent, impervious, infinitely perfect spirit. It's metaphysically impossible. It's like catching an angel on a fish hook. Saul was not trying to do the impossible. He was not trying to persecute God. He was trying to persecute those wicked idolaters who worshipped Jesus. And he was succeeding. And now the voice of God tells him that he was in fact persecuting God. Notice, God did not say, Saul, it is almost as if you are persecuting me. God did not say, I will count this as if you are persecuting me. God did not say, I feel as bad towards what you are doing as I would feel if you were persecuting me. God said, you are persecuting me. It's literal. God is extremely exact. He knows exactly what words to speak. He makes no mistake, and he never exaggerates. And Saul knows this. And this makes his whole world fall apart, because he now realizes that the one thing he thought he knew best, the one thing he was absolutely certain of, the foundation of his whole life, namely his knowledge of the true God, was wrong. It was almost as if God had announced that he was an atheist. Saul had certainly prayed for many, many hours as a pious Jew, especially the Psalms, and there is no better way to know God than to pray, especially to pray those prayers that God himself inspired. And now Saul has to admit that he did not know God after all. He had to say those painful words, "Who are you, Lord?" He had never prayed those words before. It must have felt like asking your mother if she was really your mother, or asking a circle if it was really round. And then came a second and even greater shock. God answers his question, "Who are you, Lord?" directly and literally. The answer is not mystical, like God's answer to the same question that Moses asked when he saw the burning bush. He did not say, "I am who I am." That was a mysterious name. In Hebrew, the word "I am" does not distinguish between the present tense and the future tense, so that the word can equally well be translated, "I will be who I will be." In other words, you cannot pin me down. You can't give me a human name, as the pagans often did to their gods. I am not Zeus or Osiris or Baal. Saul knew that. But now God seems to contradict all that, seems to contradict the supreme divine revelation, that word that is so holy that no pious Jew ever dares to pronounce it or to try to pronounce it. Now God says, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." God is Jesus? Jesus is God? Impossible. Unthinkable. Everything is turned upside down. The one thing in life that Saul was most absolutely sure of turned out to be false. God got himself born, and then God got himself murdered. But then Saul must have realized the third shock. The first shock was that he was persecuting God. The second shock was that Jesus was God. The third shock is that Jesus is the one Saul was dragging out of houses and into chains and jails and torture. This was the third apparent impossibility to Saul. He first thought, I can't be persecuting God, that's impossible. And then he thought, God can't be Jesus, that's impossible. And then he thought, I can't be persecuting Jesus, that's impossible, because Jesus died and left this earth years ago. Even if he resurrected from the dead and ascended into heaven, as these Christians claim, he's gone. Those Christians are not Jesus. They're Jesus followers. They're just human beings, nothing more. Jesus is somebody else. Even if Jesus is God, I'm not persecuting Jesus. I'm persecuting Christians. But God says the opposite. I am Jesus, and I am the one you are persecuting. I hope you can climb out of your familiar Christian skin and into Saul's skin and imagine what he must have felt at that moment. His whole identity was collapsing, like the World Trade Center. He was wrong about who God was, and he was wrong about who Jesus was, and he was wrong about who Christians were. And so he was wrong about who he was. He no longer knew who he was, because those other three pieces of knowledge were essential to his identity. I want to concentrate on that third shock. God himself says that in persecuting Christians, Saul is persecuting Christ. He does not say that he will count it as if that's what Saul is doing, or that Saul, in persecuting Christians, is legally and morally responsible in the eyes of God for persecuting Christ, even though he is not literally persecuting Christ. No, he is in fact really persecuting Christ. Don't water God's words down. Take them literally. It's as if God preceded these words with the rabbinic formula, verily, verily, I say unto you. The formula Jesus himself repeatedly invoked before his most radical and unbelievable sayings in order to head us off from our inevitable attempt to tame the saying, to pull the claws of the lion, to mitigate the shock of the lightning bolt. Move with me now to one more passage, one of those verily, verily sayings of Jesus. It is the saying that explains Acts 9. And if Saul had talked to anyone who had heard Jesus say this particular saying years ago, the Gospels had not been written yet, if Saul had talked to one of the apostle would have quoted this saying of Jesus to Saul to explain the point of the lightning bolt. I'll bet you know the saying I'm going to refer to, and I'll bet you now see the connection with abortion. Truly, truly, I say to you, in other words, please take this literally, not symbolically, or allegorically, or rhetorically, or figuratively, or as ifly. It is not an exaggeration or a hyperbole. Do not nuance it. Do not mix it with warm water. Take it straight. Take it in the strongest, most shocking possible sense. Whatever you are doing to one of the least of these, my brethren, you are doing to me. Not, I will count it as if you did it to me. But you are, in fact, really doing it to me. I am there. I am really present. I am as truly present, though in a different way, in my brethren, my people, my believers, my body, as I am in the Eucharist, which is also my body. I am where my body is. I am not a disembodied head hovering in the air, some infinite distance away from my body. I am not an ongoing out-of-body experience, any more than you are. What you do to my body, you do to me. And these people are my body. And therefore, whatever you do to them, you do to me. If you abort them, you abort me. If you murder them, you murder me. If you hate them, you hate me. If you reject them, you reject me. And if you love them, you love me. Let's be honest enough to confess that we find it extremely difficult to believe this. We are the chorus of voices in his parable. Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or naked or in prison and we ministered to you? Or failed to minister to you? That wasn't you. That was just your disciples, right? Wrong. That was me. I am really there. They are there too, with all their sins and faults. But behind those appearances, I have consubstantiated their souls. I have given them a share in my own personal divine life. They are the cells in my body. They are what Saul, once he became St. Paul, called members. The Greek word does not mean members of a club or of a business, but organs in a body. Arms and fingers and ears. Saints understand that. Mother Teresa understood that. She saw, literally saw, with the eyes of faith, Jesus himself in the distressing disguise of the poor. It was not an exaggeration, and not an as if, not a thought experiment, not a symbol. It's literal. C.S. Lewis understood that. Here is the profoundest paragraph he ever wrote, and he wrote plenty of them. It is a serious thing to live in a society of potential gods and goddesses. To remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to will one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship. Or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest thing ever presented to your senses. If he is your Christian neighbor, he is holy in almost the same way, for in him also Christ is truly hidden. That is why we work to end abortion. Because we cannot bear to face that face in heaven and see its tiny shards and crushed skull and burned skin and broken pelvis and hear those words, "This is what you did to me." That is why in this work to abort abortion, we will never, 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 never give up. Who is this we who will never give up? We who constitute mass citizens for life. We diverse individuals united by our common love of life, especially where life is in greatest peril. We need your help, your passion, your prayers, and your pennies. Many, many pennies. Your coins with Caesar's head on them. Paying out your coins to undermine Caesar's rule over your children, over God's children, is simultaneously rendering unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar and unto God what belongs to God. For who is our Caesar? Anyone other than Christ who speaks the sacred words over any innocent citizen, born or unborn, "This is my body." Moloch and Ashtaroth uttered these words in ancient Canaan, in the valley of Gehenna, or Gehenna. The Aztec god of the smoking mirror with the unpronounceable name uttered those words in 16th century Mexico. Those false gods, those evil spirits, those fallen angels are real. They are not myths. and they arise age after age and place after place, for they are immortal. They are our enemies, not flesh and blood, not even the flesh and blood that deliberately kills its own flesh and blood, and not even the flesh and blood that finances that killing. Unless God's word lies, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the rulers of this present darkness, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That is why we must never, 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 never give up.